The contract, the rain hammered against the windows of the Blake family home like accusations that wouldn't stop coming. Savannah pressed her back against her bedroom door, listening to the heated voices downstairs. Sure, father's desperate pleas mixing with her mother's quiet sobs. She already knew what they were going to tell her. The eviction notice had been pinned to their door for 3 weeks now, and the debt collectors had been calling every hour. When they finally called her down to the living room, her parents couldn't meet her eyes. Her father, once proud and strong, sat hunched over his whiskey glass, like a man carrying the weight of the world. Her mother's hands trembled as she twisted her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit that had grown worse with each passing month. "There's no other way," her father said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Damien Blackwood has agreed to clear the debt, all of it." Savannah felt the floor shift beneath her feet. In exchange for what? Her mother's sob caught in her throat. Marriage, a legal contract. He wants a wife, and she couldn't finish the sentence. "You're selling me?" The words came out flat, emotionless, because the alternative was screaming, until her throat bled. "It's not like that," her father said, finally looking at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. "The contract is clear. You'll be provided for, protected. The Blackwood name means something in this country. You'll want for nothing except choice," Savannah said. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the Blake family home, everything had gone still. Her parents sat there like statues, waiting for her to accept their decision to make their sacrifice easier to bear. Savannah walked to the window and stared out at the rain-soaked street. She thought about running, about disappearing into the night, and never looking back. But where would she go? She had no money, no connections, no family beyond the 2 broken people sitting behind her. And even if she ran, the debt would remain. Her parents would lose everything anyway, and she'd be alone in a world that had already proven it could be cruel. "When?" she asked, without turning around. "Tomorrow," her mother whispered. "The car will come at 10. 24 hours. That's all the time she had left to be herself, to make her own choices, to pretend that her life belonged to her. She turned back to face her parents, and for the first time in months, she saw them clearly. They weren't monsters. They were just people who had run out of options, who had made impossible choices in an impossible situation. It didn't make it right, but it made it understandable. "I'll need time to pack," she said quietly. Her father nodded, unable to speak. Her mother reached for her, but Savannah stepped back. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Her mother touched her now. If she showed her any kindness, Savannah would break apart completely. That night, she sat on her bed surrounded by the remnants of her life. 25 years reduced to a single suitcase. She folded her clothes with mechanical precision, each item a small goodbye. Her favorite sweater from college, the dress she'd worn to her first job interview, the book of poetry her grandmother had given her before she died. At the bottom of the suitcase, she placed a small velvet box. Inside was a silver locket her grandmother had worn every day until her death. It contained a photo of Savannah as a child, laughing at something just outside the frame. She'd been so happy then, so sure that the world was good and that love was real and that everything would work out in the end. She closed the locket and fastened it around her neck. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Damien Blackwood. But tonight, she was still Savannah Blake, and she would carry that girl with her into whatever came next. The morning arrived gray and cold. Savannah dressed carefully in a simple black dress, her grandmother's locket hidden beneath the collar. She braided her hair back severely, armor disguised as grooming. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The girl who had laughed in her grandmother's locket was gone, replaced by someone harder, more guarded. The black SUV arrived precisely at 10, as promised. The driver was polite but distant, holding the door open for her without meeting her eyes. As they pulled away from the house, Savannah watched her parents standing in the doorway, their faces etched with guilt and grief. She didn't wave goodbye. The drive to the Blackwood estate took 3 hours through winding California hills. Savannah stared out the window at the landscape, passing by vineyards and olive groves, expensive cars and gated communities. This was a different world from the one she'd grown up in. A world where money moved like water and power was measured in acres and influence. When they finally reached the iron gates of the Blackwood estate, Savannah felt her breath catch. House beyond was massive, all stone and glass and sharp angles. It looked like a fortress, beautiful but forbidding. The gates opened with a low mechanical hum, and the SUV glided up the long driveway. A man was waiting for her at the top of the stone steps. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall, dressed in an expensive black suit that fit him like armor. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his posture rigid with control. This was Damian Blackwood, the man who had bought her like a commodity, who had reduced her to a signature on a contract. The car stopped, and the driver opened her door. Savannah stepped out onto the gravel driveway, her heels clicking against the stone. The wind caught her hair, and for a moment she felt like it was trying to warn her about something. Damian Blackwood watched her approach with eyes like winter storms. He didn't smile, didn't speak, didn't offer any gesture of welcome, simply looked at her as if she were a problem to be managed, an acquisition to be cataloged. When she reached the steps, he spoke for the first time. "Miss Blake." His voice was deep, cultured, completely without warmth. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Younger than I expected. You're exactly as cold as I was warned." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or amusement. It was gone too quickly to be sure. "Follow me," he said, turning toward the house. Savannah picked up her suitcase and followed him through the massive front doors. The interior was even more imposing than the exterior: marble floors, soaring ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. It was beautiful in the way that museums were beautiful, impressive, untouchable, and completely without warmth. Their footsteps echoed in the silence as he led her through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Everyone in the paintings looked angry, as if they were passing judgment on anyone who dared to walk beneath their gaze. "The master suite is at the end of the hall," Damian said, stopping in front of a set of double doors. "You'll find everything you need." "There," Savannah blinked. "That's your room?" "It's our room now," he replied without looking at her. That was part of the agreement. Heat flashed through her. There were many things in that agreement. None of them asked what I wanted. He finally turned to face her, his expression still. "Unreadable. One is a luxury neither of us can afford." And then he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the hallway with her suitcase and the weight of her new reality. She pushed open the doors to the master suite and stepped inside. The room was enormous, dominated by a massive four-poster bed and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the vineyards. It was decorated in shades of cream and gold, elegant and expensive. But what struck her most was how impersonal it felt. Like a hotel suite designed by someone who had never experienced comfort, only luxury. She set her suitcase down and walked to the window. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills covered in neat rows of grapevines, mountains in the distance, the sky vast and blue. It should have felt like freedom, but instead it felt like the most beautiful prison in the world. Behind her, the bedroom door opened. She turned to see Damian standing in the doorway, his jacket removed but his shirt still, perfectly pressed. He looked like he belonged here among the expensive furniture and carefully curated art. She, on the other hand, felt like an intruder. "Dinner is at 7, he said. "The dining room is downstairs, first door on the left. And if I prefer to eat alone, then you'll be disappointed." She crossed her arms. "I'm not going to pretend this is normal, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not going to smile and play the grateful wife. Not asking you to," he replied. "I'm asking you to have dinner." With that, he left again, and Savannah was alone with her thoughts. And her growing realization that this man, her husband, was as much a prisoner of this arrangement as she was. The only difference was that he had chosen his cage. The fortress dinner that evening was an exercise in controlled tension. The dining room was absurdly formal, a mahogany table that could seat 20. Crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across bone china and silver cutlery. Damian sat at the head of the table, Savannah at his right. close enough to speak, but far enough to maintain the illusion of distance. The meal had been prepared by invisible hands. She'd glimpsed staff members earlier, a housekeeper named Mrs. Chen, who had shown her where to find towels. A groundskeeper tending to the roses outside her window, but they seemed to vanish whenever Damien was present. The food appeared as if by magic: perfectly plated salmon, roasted vegetables arranged like art, wine that probably cost more than her family's monthly grocery budget. They ate in silence for the first 20 minutes. Damien cut his fish with surgical precision, his movements economical and controlled. Everything about him was controlled, Savannah realized. His posture, his expressions, even the way he breathed seemed calculated. "Do you always eat like you're performing surgery?" she asked finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. He looked up from his plate, his gray eyes meeting hers. "Do you always make conversation with strangers?" "You're not a stranger," she replied. "You're my husband." Unfortunately, a muscle in his jaw twitched, first crack in his composure she'd seen. "I suggest you find a way to make peace with this arrangement. The sooner the better. And if I don't," his gaze darkened, "then you'll find it more difficult than it already is." Savannah set down her fork and studied him. She could see the scar near his left temple, more clearly a thin line that disappeared into his hairline. It looked old, but deliberate. Not an accident. "What happened to your face?" she asked. His hand moved unconsciously toward the scar, then stopped. "That's not your concern. Everything about you is my concern now, isn't it? We're married, after all." "We're bound by a contract," he corrected. "There's a difference." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're right. Marriage usually involves some degree of mutual consent." Damien's fingers tightened around his wine glass. For a moment she thought he might actually say something real, something that would help her understand the man who had bought her like a piece of property. Instead, he drained his glass and stood. "I have work to do," he said. "Don't wait up." After he left, Savannah sat alone in the cavernous dining room, surrounded by the detritus of their awkward meal. She finished her wine slowly, thinking about the scar, about the careful way he'd avoided her question, about the fact that he'd said "don't wait up," as if they were a normal couple with normal routines. Later, she explored the house while he was locked away in his study. The Blackwood estate was a maze of formal rooms and hidden passages, each space more impressive than the last. There was a library with floor-to-ceiling books, a conservatory filled with exotic plants, a wine cellar that looked like a cathedral. Everything was perfect, pristine, and utterly devoid of personality. She found herself in what appeared to be a family room, though it was too formal to have ever seen much family use. The walls were covered with photographs Damien at various ages, always serious, always alone. There were pictures of him at graduations, business functions, charity galas. In every single one, he looked like he was performing a role, rather than living a life. But tucked away on a side table, she found something different. A small silver frame containing a photo of a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes. She was sitting on a motorcycle, her arms wrapped around a younger version of Damien. In this picture, he looked deferential, relaxed, happy, almost unrecognizable from the man who'd bought her. "That's not yours to touch." Savannah spun around to find Damien standing in the doorway, his face cold with anger. She hadn't heard him. "Approach. I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure why she was apologizing. "I was just looking around. Look somewhere else." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took the frame from her hands, placing it face down on the table. But not before she saw his fingers tremble slightly as he handled it. "Who was she?" Savannah asked softly. "Someone who's dead." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Savannah felt something shift in her chestnut sympathy. Exactly, but recognition. She knew the sound of grief when she heard it. "I'm sorry," she said again, and this time she meant it. Damien's jaw worked silently for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "The house is large. I'm sure you can find other ways to entertain yourself." "I'm not trying to entertain myself," she said. "I'm trying to understand why you did this. Why you bought a wife like you were ordering furniture. Understanding isn't part of our arrangement. Maybe it should be." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw something raw in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or fear. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Good night, Savannah," he said, and left her standing alone in the room with the face-down photograph and a dozen new questions. The next morning she woke to find his side of the bed unslept in. The sheets were cold, undisturbed. She wondered if he'd slept at all, or if he'd spent the night in his study, working or drinking or staring at photographs of dead women. She dressed in jeans and a sweater, her own clothes, not the designer wardrobe that had mysteriously appeared in the closed hand. Went downstairs to find coffee. The kitchen was enormous and gleaming, clearly designed for entertaining on a grand scale. Mrs. Chen was there, preparing what looked like enough breakfast for a small army. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood," the housekeeper said with a polite smile. "Would you like breakfast, Mrs. Blackwood?" The name felt strange on her ears, like a costume that didn't quite fit. "Just coffee, please," Savannah said. "And you can call me Savannah." Mrs. Chen nodded but didn't repeat the name. Savannah wondered if she'd been instructed to maintain formality or if she was simply being careful. In a house like this, with a man like Damien, careful was probably the safest approach. "Is Mr. Blackwood up yet?" she asked. "He left for the office an hour ago," Mrs. Chen replied, pouring coffee into a delicate porcelain cup. "He said he wouldn't be back until evening." So he was avoiding her. Savannah wasn't sure if she was relieved or insulted. She took her coffee and wandered out to the terrace, where she could see the vineyards stretching endlessly toward the mountains. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made you want to walk for miles just to feel the sun on your face. Beautiful, isn't it? Savannah turned to find a woman approaching from the direction of the gardens. She was probably in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, wearing practical clothes and gardening gloves. "I'm Alina," the woman said with a warm smile. "I manage the grounds here. You must be Savannah. News travels fast." Alina laughed. "In a house like this, everything travels fast."
Oh.
"How are you settling in?" It was the first genuinely friendly question anyone had asked her since she'd arrived. "It's an adjustment," she said carefully. "I imagine it is." Elena's expression grew sympathetic. "Damien isn't the easiest man to understand. You've worked here long, 15 years. I knew his parents before they passed. Watched him grow up in a way." Elena's voice grew softer. "He wasn't always so closed off. What changed?" Alina was quiet for a moment, studying Savannah's face. "That's not my story to tell," she said finally. "But I will say this sometimes. The people who seem the coldest are the ones who've been burned the worst." She patted Savannah's arm gently. "Be patient with him and with yourself. These things take time." After Alina left, Savannah remained on the terrace, thinking about what she'd said. She thought about the photograph of the laughing woman, about the scar on Damien's temple, about the way he'd said someone who's dead with such careful emptiness. Whatever had happened to him, whoever he'd lost, it had hollowed him out and left him afraid of connection. And now he was trapped in a marriage of convenience with a woman who challenged him at every turn. For the first time since she'd arrived, Savannah wondered if she was the only prisoner in this beautiful fortress, or if they were both serving sentences for crimes they hadn't committed. Cracks in the armor, 3 weeks passed in a strange rhythm of avoidance and proximity. Damien left early for his office in the city and returned late, often after Savannah had already gone to bed. They shared meals in careful silence, their conversations limited to practical matters, the weather, the schedule, the mundane details of coexistence. But the house itself began to reveal its secrets. Savannah discovered that Damien suffered from nightmares. She'd wake in the early hours to find him thrashing beside her, his breathing harsh and labored, words she couldn't quite make out spilling from his lips. He never woke during these episodes, and she never mentioned them in the morning. But she began to understand that his insomnia wasn't by choice. She also learned that he played piano. Late at night, when he thought she was asleep, she'd hear music drifting up from the lower floors complex. Beautiful pieces played with the kind of skill that took years to develop. The music was always melancholy, always haunting, as if he were trying to exorcise ghosts through melody. One evening, she decided to follow the sound. The music room was on the second floor, down a hallway she'd never explored. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see Damien at a grand piano, his fingers moving across the keys with surprising grace. He'd removed his jacket and tie, rolled up his sleeves, and for once he looked almost relaxed. The piece he was playing was heartbreaking, Ummington classical, but unfamiliar, full of longing and loss. As she watched, she realized this was the first time she'd seen him doing something just for himself. Not for business or obligation or the performance of normalcy. She must have made a sound because he stopped playing abruptly and turned to Ward. "The door? I'm sorry," she said, pushing the door open wider. "I didn't mean to intrude." For a moment, he just looked at her, his hand still poised over the keys. Then he closed the piano lid with a soft thud. "I thought you were asleep," he said. "I was. The music woke me." She stepped into the room, which was smaller and more intimate than the other spaces in the house. "You play beautifully." We stood up from the bench, his guard sliding back into place. "It's late. You should go back to bed." "What was that piece?" "I didn't recognize it." "Chopin." "Ballade No. 1. She nodded, though she'd never heard of it. It sounded sad. Chopin often did. There was something in his voice, a weariness that went deeper than physical fatigue. Savannah found herself taking another step into the room, drawn by the rare glimpse of vulnerability. "Do you have trouble sleeping?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "That's not your concern?" "Everything about you is my concern now," she said, echoing his own words from weeks ago. "We're married, after all." "We're bound by a contract," he corrected. Automatically, but there was less conviction in it than before. "Right? I forgot." She moved closer to the piano, running her fingers along its polished surface. "This is beautiful." "Do you play often, when I can't sleep?" The admission slipped out before he could stop it, and she saw him realize what he'd revealed. His expression closed off again, but not before she'd seen the truth in his eyes. "The nightmares," she said softly. "I know about them." He went very still. "You know about what? You have nightmares? Most nights? You talk in your sleep sometimes?" Horror flashed across his face, followed quickly by anger. Should have said something. What would have been the point? You can't control your dreams. I could have made other arrangements. Slept elsewhere. Where? In your study. On the couch? She shook her head. "This is your house, Damien, your bedroom. I'm not going to let you exile yourself because of something you can't control." He stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." "No." "Why not?" "Because it's not your burden to carry." Words hung between them, heavy with implication. Savannah felt something shift in her chestnut sympathy. Exactly, but recognition. She knew what it was like to carry burdens alone. "What if I want to carry it?" she asked. "You don't." "How do you know?" "'Cause no one does." The honesty in his voice was startling. For a moment, the careful mask slipped completely, and she saw the man beneath, lonely, haunted, convinced that his pain was too much for anyone else to bear. "The woman in the photograph," she said quietly. "The one on the motorcycle.
Oh.
She's the one you have nightmares about." His face went white. "Don't." "What happened to her?" "She died." "How?" "It doesn't matter." "And it does to you." He turned away from her, his hands clenched into fists. "You need to stop this." "Stop what?" "Trying to understand my husband? Stop pretending this is real." The words exploded out of him with surprising force. "Stop acting like we're a normal couple with normal problems. Stop trying to fix something that can't be fixed." "I'm not trying to fix anything," she said calmly. "I'm trying to understand why you're so determined to be miserable." "I'm not miserable. I'm realistic." "You're terrified." He whirled around to face her, his eyes blazing. "You don't know anything about me? I know you bought a wife because you're afraid of actually choosing one. I know you have nightmares about a woman who died. You play piano at 2 in the morning because you can't bear to be alone with your thoughts. I know you live in this beautiful house like it's a mausoleum. And you've convinced yourself that isolation is the same thing as protection. Stop." His voice was deadly quiet. "I know you're not the monster you want me to think you are." "Yes, I am." "No, you're not. You're just scared." He moved toward her then, fast and predatory, backing her against the piano. For a moment, she thought he might actually hurt her. But when he spoke, his voice was broken rather than threatening. "You want to know what happened to her?" he whispered. "She died because of me. Because I was selfish and reckless and thought I could protect her from the world. I got her killed, Savannah. I'm the reason she's gone." The words hit her like a physical blow. She could see the truth of it in his iced guilt, the self-loathing, the absolute certainty that he was responsible for some terrible tragedy. "Tell me," she said softly. "No, Damien, no." He stepped back from her, his composure reassembling itself like armor. "You want to understand me? Then understand this. I am exactly the man you think I am. Cold, calculating, capable of destroying everything I touch. The only difference is that now you know why." He moved toward the door, then paused without turning around. "I'll sleep in the guest room from now on," he said, "so you don't have to listen to the nightmares. That's not what I want. It's what you're getting." After he left, Savannah stood alone in the music room, her heart pounding. She'd pushed too hard, too fast, and now he was retreating even further behind his walls. But she'd also seen something else in his Osama thing that gave her hope. When he'd looked at her, really looked at her, there had been longing there, just desire, but something deeper, the need to be known, to be understood, to be forgiven. He was right about one thing. She didn't know the whole story. But she was beginning to understand that his cruelty wasn't born of malicite, was born of pain so deep he'd convinced himself. It was safer to push everyone away than risk feeling that kind of loss again. The question was whether she had the courage to stay close enough to prove him wrong. The truth unveiled, true to his word, Damien moved into the guest room. For 2 weeks, Savannah slept alone in the master's suite, the absence of his presence somehow louder than his nightmares had ever been. She missed the sound of his breathing, the warmth of another body in the vast bed, even the restless tossing that had kept her awake. His absence felt like punishment. She wasn't sure which of them was being punished. During the day, he became a ghost in his own house. He left before dawn and returned after midnight, their paths crossing only in brief awkward encounters. In hallways or doorways, when they did speak, it was with the careful politeness of strangers. But Savannah was not deterred. If anything, his withdrawal only strengthened her resolve to understand him. She began to explore the house more systematically, looking for clues about the man who had bought her, but seemed determined to remain a mystery. She found them in his study. The room was Damien's sanctuary, dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with books on business and philosophy. His desk was meticulously organized, everything in its place except for one drawer that wouldn't open. It was locked, but the wood was old. Savannah had learned a few things about persistent curiosity during her years of financial struggle. A paperclip and 5 minutes of patience got her inside. The drawer contained a single manila folder, thick with newspaper clippings and photographs. The headline on the first clipping made her blood run cold. Heiress dies in motorcycle accident. Boyfriend critically injured. The photograph below showed a crumpled motorcycle and a black sedan. Emergency vehicles with flashing lights, paramedics working frantically. Savannah's hands shook as she read the article. Isabella Moreau, 24, daughter of tech mogul Richard Moreau, had died instantly when the motorcycle she was riding collided with a car that had run a red light. The driver of the car drunk, as it turned. Athad walked away with minor injuries. The motorcycle's driver, identified as Damien Blackwood, 26, had been rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Savannah flipped through the other clippings. Lines about the investigation, the drunk driver's trial, the settlement that had made Damien even wealthier than he'd been before. But wealth couldn't bring back the dead, judging by the photo of Damien leaving the Corthosithon scarred, his eyes hollow with grief, couldn't heal the living either. At the bottom of the folder was a letter, written in elegant feminine handwriting on expensive stationery. Savannah knew she shouldn't read it, but she couldn't stop herself. "My darling Damien," it began. "If you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and you're probably blaming yourself. Please don't. You know how I feel about unnecessary guilt. It's a waste of energy that could be spent on better things, like loving each other, being happy, like living the life we planned together. Savannah's vision blurred as she continued reading. The letter was full of inside jokes and shared memories, references to places they'd traveled and dreams they'd shared. But it was the ending that broke her heart completely. "I need you to promise me something," Isabella had written. "If I'm gone, you have to keep living. Not just existing, but really living. Fall in love again, get married, have children, build the family we talked about. I know you think you could never love anyone else, but I also know you have too much love in you to waste it on grief. Find someone who makes you laugh the way I did, someone who challenges you the way I did. Someone who sees the man I see when I look at Unette, the heir to a fortune or the CEO of a company, but the person who sings off-key in the shower and cries at sad movies and would give up everything for the people he loves." The letter was dated 3 weeks before Isabella died. She'd written it as a precaution before they'd taken a cross-country motorcycle trip, together a trip that had ended in tragedy on a rainy night in San Francisco. Savannah closed the folder. With trembling hands, now she understood. Damien hadn't bought her as a wife. He'd bought her as a penance. He'd convinced himself that a loveless marriage was what he deserved, that he'd forfeited his right to happiness when he'd failed to protect the woman he loved. She was still sitting at his desk when he found her. "What are you doing in here?" The voice was deadly quiet, but she heard the fear underneath the anger. She turned to face him, the folder in her hands. "I was looking for answers," she said. His face went white when he saw what she was holding. "You had no right. You're right, I didn't. But I needed to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you're so determined to punish yourself." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and snatched the folder from her hands. "Now you don't know anything about this. I know she loved you. I know she wanted you to be happy. I know she'd be heartbroken to see what you've become. Don't." His voice cracked. "Don't talk about her. She wrote you a letter, Damien. She made you promise to keep living." "I am living." "No, you're not. You're hiding. You're so afraid of losing someone else that you've decided not to care about anyone. That's not true. Then why did you buy me? Why did you pick a woman who was forced into marriage instead of finding someone who might actually choose you?" He flinched, as if she'd struck him. "Because I knew you'd never love me." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and heartbreaking. Savannah felt her anger dissolve, replaced by something deeper and more complex. And that felt safer, she said softly. "Yes, because if I never loved you, you'd never have to lose me. Yes, and you'd never have to risk feeling that kind of pain again." He sank into the chair across from his desk, his head in his hands. Yes, Savannah stood up and walked around the desk, stopping in front of him. "Look at me." He didn't move. "Damien, look at me." Slowly he raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, full of a pain so deep it took her breath away. "I'm not going to tell you that what happened wasn't your fault," she said, "because I don't know all the details and I'm not qualified to absolve you of anything. But I will tell you this. Buying me, marrying me, forcing both of us into this loveless arrangement, it's not honoring Isabella's memory. It's betraying it." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand. And help me understand. Tell me what really happened." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, so quietly she had to strain to hear him, he began to speak. "We were coming back from Big Sur. Isabella wanted to take the scenic route, said she didn't want the trip to end. It was getting dark, starting to rain. I told her we should stop, find a hotel, wait for the weather to clear. But she laughed and said she trusted me too. Keep her safe." His voice broke on the last word. Savannah waited, not daring to breathe. The car came out of nowhere. Ran the red light going at least 60. I saw it coming, tried to swerve, but there wasn't time. The impact threw us both from the bike. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. She was already gone. That's not your fault. I was driving. I was supposed to protect her. You were in an accident. A drunk driver killed her, not you. If I'd insisted we stop, then maybe you both would have died the next day, or the next week, or 50 years from now. You can't control everything, Damien. You can't protect everyone from everything. I should have been able to protect her. Now you've decided to protect yourself by never caring about anyone again." He looked up at her, his eyes blazing with anger and pain. It's better than the alternative. Is it because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're dying a little more every day? At least I'm not taking anyone else with me. Yes, you are. You're taking me. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw real fear in his eyes. What do you mean? Trapped here too. Trapped in a marriage with a man who's determined to be miserable, who's convinced himself that love is dangerous and connection is weakness. I'm trapped watching you waste your life on guilt and self-pity. I never asked. You too care about me? No, you didn't, but I do anyway. And watching you destroy yourself is killing me just as surely as it's killing you. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. What? This? You caring? Me caring? It's too dangerous. Dangerous for? Whom? For both of us. Savannah moved closer to him, close enough that she could see the tension in his shoulders, the rapid rise and fall of his chest. What if it wasn't dangerous? She asked softly. What if it was just human? It doesn't matter. It's too late. Why is it too late? Because I've already started to care about you. The admission hung between them like a confession.
Ow.
Felt her heart stop, then start again faster than before. When? Wait, she whispered. The first night. When you stood up to me at dinner. When you refused to be intimidated. He turned to face her, his expression raw. I told myself it was just attraction. Physical. But then you started asking questions. Started trying to understand me. And I realized what? I realized I was more afraid of losing you than I was of never having you at all. The truth settled between them like a living thing. Savannah felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't look away. So what do we do now? She asked. I don't know. His voice was barely a whisper. I've spent so long convincing myself that isolation was safety that I don't know how to be any other way. We learned together. What if I hurt you? What if you don't? What if I lose you? What if you don't? He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war being fought behind his eyeshope, against fear, love against self-preservation. I don't know how to do this, he said finally. Neither do I, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to know everything at once. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we could try being married. Really married.
Oh, because that.
Not because of a contract, or a debt or fear, but because we choose to. If it doesn't work, then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have given ourselves a chance. He reached out then, his hand trembling as he touched her face. I'm scared, he admitted. Am one. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you either. But we probably will. People do. It's inevitable. Maybe. But maybe the risk is worth it. He leaned down then, slowly giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, hesitant, as if he were afraid she might disappear. But when she kissed him back, really kissed him, he deepened the contact, pouring years of loneliness and longing into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. What happens now? He asked. Now we see. What happens when two people stop being afraid of each other? If we fail, then we fail together. The first time since she'd known him, Damien smiled. It was tentative, fragile, but real. I'd like that, he said. Which part? All of it. Trying, failing, succeeding. Together. Savannah felt something ease in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. So would I. Hand intertwining their fingers. I have a confession to make. What? I've been thinking about moving back into our room. I miss sleeping next to you, even with the nightmares, especially with the nightmares. When I wake up and you're not there, it's worse. Then come back, are you sure? I'm sure. He squeezed her hand. There's something else. What? I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating and true. Savannah felt her heart swell with something she'd never experienced before, at the desperate attachment of youth, but the deep, abiding love of someone who had chosen to see another person completely and love them anyway. I love you too, she said. And for the first time in 5 years, Damian Blackwood looked like he might actually believe in second chances. New beginnings 6 months later, Savannah woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the unfamiliar but wonderful sound of Damian's voice mixing with Mrs. Chen's gentle chatter. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, and sunlight streamed through the windows of their bedroom, no longer his bedroom or her bedroom, but truly theirs. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely, but they'd become less frequent, less violent. When they did come, Savannah would wake with him, hold him until the trembling stopped, and sometimes he would talk about Isabella, about the guilt he still carried, about the slow work of learning to forgive himself. She'd learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days were better than others. Some days the weight of the past felt manageable, and some days it threatened to pull them both under. But they'd learned to weather the storms together, to be anchors for each other when the waves grew too high. She found him in the kitchen, making pancakes with the kind of focused concentration he once reserved for business deals. He'd rolled up his sleeves, and there was flour in his hair, and he looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Good morning," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "Good morning, beautiful." He leaned back against her, and she could feel the smile in his voice. "I thought I'd surprise you with breakfast." "What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to make my wife pancakes?" "Your wife," she repeated, still sometimes amazed by how different those words sounded. Now, not like a burden or a contract, but like a promise they'd both chosen to keep. He turned in her arms, and the kiss he gave her was warm and sweet and tasted like possibility. "I have something for you," he said. "What kind of something?" "Kind that might make you cry." She raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried? No, but you might want to sit down." Led her to the kitchen table, where a manila envelope waited next to a vase of fresh flowers. Savannah looked at it suspiciously. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside the envelope was a thick stack of papers covered in legal language. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at, and when she did, her breath caught. "Damian, what is this?" "The dissolution of our original marriage contract, and a new one." She stared at the papers, her vision blurring. "A new one. Read it." The new contract was nothing like the first. Where the original had been cold and transactional, this one was warm and personal, spoke of love and partnership, of shared dreams and mutual respect. It was less a legal document than a love letter, a promise of forever freely given. "This is," she looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "This is beautiful. I wanted to give you a choice," he said softly. "I wanted you to be able to choose me, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Of course I choose you, even knowing what you know about me, even knowing that I'm broken and scared and probably always will be, especially knowing that." She stood up and cupped his face in her hands. "I don't want perfect, Damian. I want real. I want you exactly as you are, broken pieces and all. I want you. Not because I paid for you, not because I owned you, but because you chose to love me anyway." They signed the new contract together, their names flowing across the page, like a dance. When it was done, Damian pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we're already married," he said, "but I thought you might like to have this anyway." Inside the box was a ring knot, the massive diamond she might have expected, but something smaller, more personal. It was a simple band of white gold set, with a single emerald surrounded by small diamonds that caught the light like stars. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It was my grandmother's. She left it to me with instructions that it should only go to someone I loved completely." He took her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "I love you completely, Savannah. Will you marry me again? For real this time?" She said without hesitation. "Yes, yes, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. They were married again 3 weeks later, in the garden behind the house. It was a small ceremony, just Alina and Mrs. Chen and a few close friends Savannah had made in the months since. She'd stopped being a prisoner and started being a wife. The judge who performed the ceremony was the same man who had overseen their original contract. and he smiled when he pronounced them husband and wife by choice and with love. The reception was held on the terrace, with strings of lights and Elena's flowers and music that made everyone want to dance. Savannah wore a simple white dress she'd chosen herself, and Damien wore a suit that made his eyes look like storm clouds in the best possible way. During their first dance, she looked up at him and saw something she'd never seen before: complete happiness. Not the guarded contentment of recent months, but pure, unfiltered joy. "What are you thinking about?" she asked.
Art.
"I'm thinking about how wrong I was," he said. "About what?" "About love being dangerous. About connection being weakness. About the past being stronger than the future. And now, I think love is the only thing that makes any of this worth it. The risk, the fear, the possibility of loss, it's all worth it for this moment, right here with you." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, and the guests cheered, and the music played. And for the first time in either of their lives, everything felt exactly as it should be. Later that night, as they lay in bed holding each other, Savannah thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate transaction that had made her a stranger's wife to the love that had made her a willing partner in building something beautiful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently?" she asked. "Sometimes," Damien said.
Oh.
"But then I remember that we might never have met at all. And I'd rather have you this way than not have you at all. Even though it started with a contract, especially because it started with a contract. It means we had to choose each other every day. We had to work for this. And now we get to keep choosing each other every day for the rest of our lives." Savannah smiled and settled deeper into his arms. "I can live with that. So can I." Outside, the wind rustled through the vineyards, and the stars shone down on the estate that had once been a fortress but had become a home. In the distance, a church bell chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. And in the master bedroom of the Blackwood estate, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances fell asleep in each other's arms. No longer afraid of the dark or the dreams that might come, because they had learned that some things are worth the risk of loving. Some things are worth the risk of losing. Some things are worth choosing again and again, every day, for the rest of your life. The end.